what we're talking about today is going to be recruitment and interviewing. This is a tool or a process that GCFA uses. Tricia and I have been in human resources for quite some time. We have a process that we go through that is it's a pretty structured recruitment process. We have 9 steps here, but of course there are other steps weaved throughout this process. We do help people throughout the connection with recruitment. We go as far as just providing you maybe some guidance or advice on where to post a position. We've also, I think we've placed almost 14 of our annual conference treasurers in other roles. So if there's any help that you need, just feel free to reach out to us. Sometimes it's just a quick conversation and some tips. But so the first thing that we're going to start with is a job description. We're going to go through that in some detail, posting the position, reviewing resumes, phone screens, interview questionnaires, the importance of training people that are going to be doing the interviews, facilitating the interview process, and then what comes after the interview. So first, job descriptions. And like I said, you have that attachment. But job descriptions are very important because at the very beginning, it's the outset of what do I expect as a manager for you once you become an employee. And I will say, sometimes I see job descriptions where there's literally a list of 30 to 40 things. You do not have to put everything in a job description, but it is good to put the overarching, what are the responsibilities of the job? What are the key essential functions of the job? And then also extremely important, what are the minimum qualifications for the job? So why does it exist? What's the candidate expected to accomplish? And then what's required for them to effectively perform in the position? And this will kind of guide us through the rest of the process. So for example, if one of your positions says a bachelor's degree is required, then whenever you start doing the resume review to determine who you're going to phone screen or who you're going to bring in for an in-person interview, if somebody does not have a bachelor's degree, then you're not even going to look at their resume. You will just have kind of your checklist of minimum qualifications, and whatever you said is required, that's what you're going to kind of separate that yes stack, no stack into your resumes. And right here where it says it protects against potential discrimination charges, that's kind of what I'm getting at. If you're clear on the outset of here is what I need for a job description or for this position to be performed effectively, it helps you if you have a clear deciding factor as to why I'm looking for what I'm looking for and why did I select these candidates in the yes stack. If you say that you have a bachelor's degree as required, and then you go back and you see somebody that looks appealing that does not have a bachelor's degree, and you put them in the yes stack, then you're going to have to go back to all of your other resumes and review them to see who you need to pull in, because you've got to make sure you have some clear parameters of why you're selecting who you're selecting. So it provides the framework, not just for the job, but also for salary comparison, classification and assignment within that pay structure. It also allows for that promotional opportunity and career development within an organization. It's important to share, you have your job descriptions. If somebody wants to be promoted, then they can have the job description for that particular position maybe they're interested in, so they know what they need to be able to move up in the company one day. And it also helps you with how you measure a potential job. Tricia's going to be talking about performance reviews later on. So having a good, clean job description, it also can help you set goals for that position. So job posting. So we have our job description, and then whenever we work with a group in terms of recruiting, we also say, okay, we're going to create 2 documents, the job description. We're also going to create a job posting, because you don't want to just take your job description and post that on Indeed or post that up on LinkedIn. You want to kind of jazz it up a little bit and make the posting more appealing to your candidates that you're trying to attract. And as we all know, job descriptions and how they are written can be pretty boring. So you want to have some different language that kind of jazzes it up, makes it more exciting. And then you add in certain things that may be appealing to the candidate, whether it's your benefits, if you have a generous vacation package, things like that that you might want to include that's going to attract people to your organization. So your goal should also be to attract a diverse group of qualified candidates. So you want to cast a wide net as possible. One thing that we have within a United Methodist Connection, and I did not think to put this here, but I could also, if you want to email me, or I can maybe, Tricia, I'm asking you right now, if you'll make a note. So within the United Methodist Connection, we have the minority caucuses that at GCFA we always post with, because it's going to help us attract a diverse group of candidates. And sometimes our positions are required that they're United Methodist, so that helps as well. But you want to try and post your position as many places as possible, because that's going to ensure that you get a large applicant pool that has a diverse group of qualified candidates. And I say here, have one person that serves as the clearinghouse, so to speak, for all resumes and applications. We usually have one or two people, but that would be, so Tricia and I, if we're the ones going through the resumes, we're going to sit down together and we're going to say, okay, minimum qualifications is a bachelor's degree, and they have to have 3 years of supervisory experience. So those are going to be the first things we're looking through, just yes, no, yes, no. And then we at GCFA say that we don't accept unsolicited resumes. So that last bullet dot there that you see, if you do, whether or not the materials that you're recruiting with, your resumes that you're getting, any kind of applications, you want to hold on to those for at least 1 year after you receive them. So we're going to decide now. We've got our job description, we've posted our position, and we're going to start getting applicants. So we're going to be looking at, okay, who's going to review the resumes and conduct the phone screens? Is it 1 or 2 people? And how many in-person interviews will take place? I will say right now, during COVID, it's been a little bit different, because we're doing more in-person or online interviews, and of course, less in-person interviews. And I think depending on the position, there have been cases during COVID that we've done an in-person interview, but I will say that the online interview, we have found that it is a good way to kind of weed out even further the candidates that you want to bring in person. So what we've done so far, do our candidates meet the minimum job qualifications? What skills, experience do they offer? Have we reviewed every application or resume that we've received? So it's very important whenever you have your job posting that you have a job close date. So if we say, okay, the job is closing as of 1/27/2021, we are not going to look at any candidates after that. So you do need to look at every single resume up until that point. I will say, make sure you review your cover letter, especially in a nonprofit type of organization in a religious setting. I think it's really important to review your cover letter to make sure you get a good understanding of the candidate. And consider correct spelling, grammar, and attention to detail. Trish and I were laughing recently because we had somebody on attention to detail actually misspell that line. So you really want to make sure that if that's really important to the job, that you're paying attention to that. I will also say, do not write on any applications that you have resumes or cover letters, because as I mentioned, you're going to want to hold on to that material for 1 year. If you've been doodling on the resume or the cover letter or the application and say there's a discrimination charge, somebody later could come in and say your doodle meant that you were making, it was like a code or something, and you were making a note of why you didn't want to hire that particular candidate. So it's extremely important to not write notes on the application, resume, or cover letter, because those could be discoverable later on. So your initial screening, does it seem like the applicant performed the essential functions? What's the applicant's work history? Do you see any red flags? And if this person's never worked in a nonprofit environment before, have they had any volunteer or experiences that you can see? So I put that in there because like I said, we've hired a lot of treasurer positions. We've hired a lot of positions within GCFA and other areas of the church. And not to say that somebody that's only worked in profits would not be successful in that role, but you want somebody that is mission-minded. And I mean, a perfect example of being at GCFA and in my role, you really, in a nonprofit environment, you don't have the team, you don't necessarily have the bandwidth that you may have in a profit company. So it's not like I have several assistants that are doing all the things for me. It's kind of all hands on deck at certain times. So you just want to make sure that the candidate you're looking for is going to be willing to be flexible and nimble, do everything that's expected of him or her, and then probably beyond that. And then when I say red flags, so of course we look at job hopping. How many times have they left a company within a year? Do they have a long work history? Now, it's not that it's necessarily a negative if they have a gap in employment, but you may want to ask that they explain that. Or if they have changed from job to job to job, you ask that they explain that. And maybe it was that they were doing more temp work and they were trying to build a certain kind of experience. So like I said, it's not always a negative, but you just want to hear that explanation. So phone screens. I will say, thinking about phone screens, the first time I started doing it, it's tedious, it takes a lot of time, but especially during COVID, the benefit of it has been really great, because where we were seeing 30 or so applications or resumes for a position, we're now seeing 60 or more, because there are so many people that are out of work right now. So phone screens are a really great tool to go from our 60 resumes that we have, and how do we narrow it down to bring in those 5 or 10 people for an online interview. The phone screens, I mean, it can take maybe 15 minutes, and you have a good idea if you want to continue the conversation into an online interview. Because of course, with your resume, you're going to see the best, or hopefully the best, that people are putting forward. But the phone screen really gives you an opportunity to look at that resume and then see, okay, is the candidate's experience really what they're saying it is? So you do want to ask the same question of every candidate. That's not to say that if there's a follow-up or you need more information, you can ask the candidate to expand. But I put in, I think that was one of the first ones that
I think Kaylin's frozen. I couldn't tell if it was my connection or if it was her connection. So can everyone hear me okay? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So until she comes back, I'll just kind of pick up. So she mentioned that she sent out the phone screen questions that we typically do use in this process to review the candidate's experience. And as part of that, oh, we've lost her screen too. As part of that, and you'll see that again, she sent that out through the chat. But as part of that, you will see, I'm trying to open one up for you. As part of that, you will see there's an objective rating scale from 1 to 5 for each of the questions. And so typically what we do is we try to rate the individuals based on their individual responses to each question. Typically we have 1, maybe 2 people doing the phone screens for each of the candidates so that they can use a consistent rating scale. And another thing that we do, if there are 2 individuals who are conducting phone screens, then we would have them meet and kind of talk through the answers to see if they're consistent in terms of, if one person answered in this way and another person answered similarly, are you giving them the same score? So that is something to consider as well. I'm going to pull up her training until she gets back. Give me just 1 minute. All right, just share my screen. So once you conduct the phone screens, you would move to the in-person interviews. And this is typically the same process. We recommend that you have a questionnaire that gives the same questions to each individual. You don't want to stray too far from that list of questions because you don't want to show that you're asking different questions of different candidates. It's okay to ask follow-up questions to something that they've said, but you don't want to say, stray from your questions and maybe ask one candidate, where do you see yourself in 5 years, when you didn't ask that of the other candidates, because, if it comes down to why this person did or didn't get the job and your notes are used in some sort of litigation, there are going to be questions as to why you treated one candidate differently. So typically we recommend that you stick to the list of questions, that these are open-ended and based on the essential job functions of the position. So you're going to want to look through. Hello, Caitlin. Welcome back. We moved on to in-person interviews.
Okay, sorry about that. Caitlin got a new computer and it's not having a good day. So in-person interviews. So we moved from phone screens. So I will say, as Tricia probably mentioned, so we develop our interview questionnaire ahead of time. And one of the things that we do, on our recent interview, I created the list of questions. I sent them to Tricia and I said, okay, here's what we're trying to get at. And she's looking at them. So it's good to have somebody to kind of bounce ideas off of. I also, one thing that I will share with you all, I'll send it out in an email, Tricia, if you'll make this note as well, so I don't forget. I have a really great website that I go to where you can put in basically any title of any job. And it pulls up, here's some great questions. And it has this huge question bank. An HR friend of mine shared that with me. So that's a really great tool to have. Questions should be open-ended. Absolutely. So if you ask somebody, are you detail-oriented? Yes, of course I am. But if you ask somebody questions as to, tell me about a time where you had to work on a project and you had multiple deadlines, it gets them in the frame of mind of where they've worked before, giving you actual real-world examples. And again, each candidate should be asked the same question, but it's not so structured that you can't ask follow-up. So if they answer a question and you need more information, you need more detail, always feel comfortable following up. So talking about one of the reasons it's really important to have such a structured interview, don't ask any questions that could be viewed as discriminatory. So race, ethnic origin, national origin, citizenship, age, disability, children, marital status, applicant's personal life, prior arrest records. So of course, in our minds, these things, obviously, we're not going to do that. We're not doing that anymore. But it's really important to train your interviewers to make sure that they're not unintentionally asking any questions. I will say, being that we are a religious organization, we can ask questions if it's based on the job. So for example, at GCFA, and I think the Book of Discipline actually mandates that general secretaries and treasurers are United Methodist. But a lot of our roles on the executive team and some director positions throughout are also, it's either United Methodist preferred, strongly preferred, or in some cases required. So you can do that. But if it's a custodian position, for example, you may not get away with having it be United Methodist. So you just need to kind of think through your job description, and that is something that you would include if United Methodist required or United Methodist preferred. That would be on your job description. So in terms of race, ethnic group, national origin, even have somebody coming in and saying, oh, that's an interesting last name. Where are you from? Things like that. You just want to be really careful. Asking about age. A lot of times I do get people saying, well, what if he or she wants to retire soon? You have to leave those things up to the employee. And at the end of the day, or the questions you're asking or the reasons you're asking them based on can the person do the job or not. And that's what you really want to, is this person qualified and will she or he be able to do the job? So give yourself some breathing room in between interviews. One, you may have a talker, so your interview is going to go over a little bit. Or you just, if you have 5 back-to-back, especially during Zoom, it's really nice to be able to stand up, take a break. And you want to keep yourself fresh as much as you can for 5 interviews in one day. You want to try and keep yourself fresh, so you're giving just as much energy to your first applicant as you are to your last. If you're using technology, isn't this appropriate right now? If you're using technology and doing online interviews, always test your system ahead of time. So you just want to make sure that you're able to get in and get on. And if you're going to use Zoom and have a waiting room, a lot of times we only use one link for all of our candidates. And so we're going to have a waiting room. You don't want to accidentally let somebody in when you're still interviewing somebody else. So just make sure you understand the technology that you're using. So again, just a reminder to keep all of your interview notes for all applicants on file for at least 1 year. This is also why it's really important that you do the training ahead of time with your interviewers, because I think, so I showed you the phone screen template. We do a very similar template for our in-person and online interviews. And we actually take notes on every question that the candidate is asked. So you want to make sure that your interviewers understand that you're going to collect those forms at the end of the interview process, and everything they write is discoverable. So you want to make sure that they're not writing, ooh, that shirt's ugly, because we have seen some things. So you want to be really careful. Don't talk about appearance. As the next one says, don't allow superficial impressions. You don't want to talk about appearance or anything like that. You want it to be all job related. And I try and tell people, don't write what you feel, write what you observe. So I have seen where people say, I feel like she's not interested, or I feel like he doesn't really care about the job. What did you observe to make you say that? We've actually had candidates huff or roll their eyes at a question we were asking them. Or at the very end, it's clear that they didn't research the United Methodist Church. So there's different clues that can give you that. So just be careful about what you're writing on those interview notes. So just some helpful tips, whether it's online or in person, arrive on time, make sure you're giving the same courtesy that we're expecting of our candidates, and being prepared. Make sure you had a copy of their resume, that you're familiar with the person. You've reviewed the job description as well. And that's something, if you're bringing in people to interview that aren't familiar with the position, but are part of the organization, make sure they understand what was in the job description also. And I say be welcoming. You want to make sure, especially if we're doing Zoom interviews and they're looking at 6 squares on the screen, you want to try and have a pleasant smile, make them feel comfortable, because the more comfortable they feel, the more they're going to be willing to talk to you and give you information. And that's what you really want, is to get to know who the person is, not just who are they trying to show you who they want to show you. And then also one thing I will point out, if you are doing online interviews, you want to let the candidate know, we're going to be taking notes during this, because a lot of times, like, we're looking here, but then I'm taking notes over here. So you just want to make sure that there's a good understanding that I'm not reading emails and ignoring you. I'm taking notes during the interview. So just make sure that they're aware of that if that's your situation. And try and limit interruptions. If it's online or in person, just silence your cell phone, because they can hear where you're getting dings if you're texting each other. If you're getting calls, if you're in the office, let people know, don't come in, go into a conference room, but really listen to the applicant. And one thing I try and do is just get myself in that frame of mind of, if I have 10 questions that I'm asking, not let the first question inform the 5th question. Really try and listen to each individual answer and think about how they're responding to each answer, because they may be really nervous up front, and then they may, towards the end get more comfortable, and then they tell you, they give you more information, what they're looking for. But also, maybe they were really more focused up front, and maybe they get too comfortable towards the end, and they're telling you things that you never thought a candidate would tell you. which also happens. So just make sure you're paying attention and you don't let, your upfront what's going on inform the rest of the interview. Also allow silence. And what I mean by that, if you ask a question that is going to be kind of difficult for them to answer, don't try and answer it for them. The perfect example, it happens a lot around really specific questions, like, tell me about a time that you had a budgeting issue and your manager got mad, or whatever. And if you just kind of stop, a lot of times we try and fill in and say, well, what I mean is, did you ever have this happen? Don't do that. Just let them pause, let them collect their thoughts and process, and then they will respond, because nobody likes that uncomfortable silence anyway, so they won't be quiet too long. Redirect the conversation. So as I mentioned earlier, you are going to have talkers, and you will know with that first question of, tell me about your background and how it relates to this position. Within if you're still 20 minutes in on that first question, you're going to know that, okay, I need to keep track of time. I need to make sure I keep this candidate focused. And so just by the second or third interview, you can say, oh, we have 7 more questions to go, and we only have about 30 minutes. So let's try and, so just kind of give them a clue that here's where we are, here's what question we're on, and here's how much more we have to go. So ask the candidate if there's any additional questions, and I like to make a note of what questions they ask. So we usually have a space at the very end of our interview questionnaire of what questions did they ask. And, if they just say, what are the next steps, they may not be that engaged. But if you can tell that they've researched the annual conference, they've researched United Methodist Church, that, they've really looked into the mission and they have really good questions. I also like, you can tell whenever they said, okay, what's success like 30 days from now or 90 days from now? When you can just tell that they're really engaged, I think that shares a lot about how much they may want the position and they're willing to work for you all. Explain when you're going to notify the candidate. I think it's really important, especially being that we are the church. I think it's important to give the courtesy to each and every candidate, whether they don't make it through the resume round. We will send out an email to every single person that applies. So if they're not going to pass that first round, they get an email. If they don't get through the phone screens, we notify them. So every person that doesn't make it on to the next round does get a notification. And I think that's really important. But you do want to let them know whenever you meet with them, we're interviewing candidates. We have about 2 weeks left of this process, so you should hear from us at the end of the second week, something like that, just to give them a heads up, because it is a very anxious time for candidates. Also, an expected start date. You want to make sure that they can kind of work out in their schedule if they're going to be going into that final round. And then you also want to be really clear in terms of background checks and pre-employment testing. One, what's really important about background checks is you want to make sure you're very consistent with that process. So if you've never done one before, well, one, I recommend that you do them. But you want to make sure you're doing the same kind of checks for the same position. So, for example, in the finance realm, we usually do credit checks for all of our finance positions, but other positions may not get a credit check. But everybody gets a background check. A lot of places now aren't doing pre-employment drug screening, but that's a conversation you need to have. Is that something you have done? Do you want to do it? But just making sure you're really consistent. And then whenever you are talking with the candidate, you need to let them know if they make it into that final round, they are expected to pass background checks and pre-employment screening. Whenever we do our offer to the final candidate, one of the things we say it verbally whenever we make our verbal offer is that we would like to offer you this position contingent on a successful background check, drug screening, and reference check. And then we also make sure we put that language in our offer letter as well. It's just really important. And I will say one of the questions we get asked quite a bit is, can we do background checks if you have 3 final candidates? Can we do background checks on all 3 of those candidates? And our answer is typically no. One, there's different rules between different states, so there's not kind of like a blanket rule for that. But I will say, if you're doing a thorough background check, our background checks that we use, it goes into every state that the person's worked in. It goes down to the county level. It checks, felon, everything, sexual, any previous sexual convictions, everything. So it gets very, very detailed. It can take up to 2 weeks, and it can also be kind of expensive depending on how many people. If you were going to do 3 people, that would be pretty expensive. So we recommend you've made an offer to your final candidate and they have to pass all of your checks. Now, one thing that we typically do, if you have 2 candidates that you like, we do not tell the second candidate that they did not make it into that final round until the background check has come back successful. So we wait until we've done the background check, we've done all the proper screening, and then once offer letter signed, background checks back, then we'll let the second candidate know that he or she didn't make it into that final position. I will say, in some cases, I've seen people do reference checks, but you do want to make sure you try and get some type of signed consent from your candidate if you're going to do a reference check, because typically an organization is not going to give you anything other than, yes, he or she worked here, it's dates of hire, and I think that's it. I'm looking at Tricia, title and dates of hire. That's all you're going to get typically. And just as a side note, that's all that you should be giving. If somebody calls you and wants to do a verification, you should only give the titles of the employee and their dates of hire. If they want anything more than that, we recommend having a signed consent letter saying that you can give that information out. So background check should be done, signed letter, validate social security number, education, criminal convictions. Sometimes if you have somebody that's going to be doing driving, also I know some of you work with churches that have daycares, that's more intense checks as well. So it just depends on like how detailed you get on certain positions, what you need to do. And then reference checks. These are also really helpful, and also depending on the certain position, we do recommend making sure you have somebody that's not a friend or family member, but it's somebody that's actually worked with the candidate. You have the same 3 to 5 questions, just like with the other interviews that we've done. You keep consistent questions, you make notes. But again, you want to make sure that you have the signed consent that you can do that. As I mentioned, supervisor, you want to check the person's position, workplace relation, and then find out what their strengths are, how they interacted with other people. Kind of more of that, not just can they do the job, but that job fit. This is where you're going to get some more of that type of information. So, Tricia, can we go to any of the questions that we have? And I'm going to include my email. I'm going to go ahead. I think some of you have it, but I'm going to put my email here in the chat. So if there's any questions or any questions that you have.
So one of the questions that we've gotten a couple times is, will we get a copy of the slides? I know we will be sending out a recording of the training within 2 weeks. That will include, again, the recording and the slides that are included. Let's see. That there was one question, does GCFA handle the HR currently for conferences? And if so, is it a service provided through apportionments, or is there a fee associated with the service?
So it depends. Yes, there is a fee, but it depends on what you're looking for. So for example, we work with, I think Jenny's on here. We work with the Wisconsin Annual Conference, but they have no HR team on staff. So we work with them completely as their HR. We're helping them put together like an HRIS system for payroll and all of that. We're doing policy manual, compensation. So there's a lot of work. So there is a certain fee associated with that. Debbie's on here. Hey, Debbie. She is the HR person at the New England conference. So we just work with them kind of as big things come up. It's not every day, like I'm literally every day with Wisconsin, but it's just like as things come up, we work with Debbie. And we also provide different services if it's just a recruiting service, or we've gone in and done organizational assessments. So it just kind of depends. And like I said, when it comes to recruiting, like I think it was Oregon, Idaho, they were having trouble getting an HR person, and they gave me a call and I said, you know, post it on SHRM, post it here, post it there. And I just did like a quick 20-minute research, and within an hour they had like 30 applicants. So, I mean, there was no cost there. So it just depends on like how much time's involved. But one example I will say is that your apportionment dollars are definitely at work, because whereas, you know, if you go to a recruiting firm, it could be $30,000. Ours is like a fraction. It's really just paying for our individual time. And it's, I mean, it's very low cost in terms of what we do.
One of the questions, is there a job application template, and is a job application a must?
I'm going to say no, because we don't do it really anymore. So we have gone more towards resumes and cover letters. I mean, I think it depends on the industry, but I think in terms of what we're looking for, you don't need a job application. I think that a resume is sufficient in terms of what you're looking for. But consistency. If you are using an application for one person or one job, use it for all jobs. But just whatever you do, be consistent.
Is there a rejection email sample available?
Yes. Let me just, Trisha, let's add that to our notes of things we can just send out. And also, I mean, just so you all know, I don't like reinventing the wheel either. And I Google a lot of things. So if you're ever out there, I mean, just the key to Google is being able to put 5 different things together and make one thing sound good. So if you don't ever have something, just Google it. It's what we do a lot.
Can't you ask if they are eligible to be rehired?
Trisha?
I mean, you can ask, but I think it depends on their job as to whether or not that they can tell you. They probably have a policy that, you know, direct supervisors cannot respond to reference checks. That's a possibility. They won't release that information usually without a signed waiver from the employee saying that they can give you that information. So you can ask, but you may or may not get an answer. And then if they have fired them for gross misconduct, or if they got in a fight, or there was some sort of cause reason that you need to be aware of, they are there's a line of liability as to what they're responsible for telling you. So again, you can ask, but they may or may not answer.
And I will say you can, I would say you can ask anything too. And one of the things, we did a training similar to this last week. And one of the things, the reason I turned to Trisha and she made me remember, whenever you're answering that question, also be very careful too if they ask about rehire, because whoever kept a record of that, why did they put yes or no to rehire status? You know, in some companies, they're not rehireable because they didn't turn in a 2 weeks notice. But it also could be because they were fighting on the job. So it's just, you want to be really careful how you answer that. And so, yeah, absolutely ask whatever you want to ask, because who knows what they'll tell you. But whenever you're answering that, I would just caution to only answer the dates of hire and the title.
What program or software do you use or recommend to complete background checks?
We use the group that we use, and this is not any kind of like advocating for them in any way, but we use the group HireRight. One benefit to them, and I'm sure there's 1,000 like them right now, is that it's all online. And so we can just send our candidate a link and they go online and they sign up. I will say there might be a fee for initial sign up, and we have actually worked with conferences. We don't charge anything, like we don't make money for it, but because we have the initial fee, if you want it to go through us as part of United Methodist Church, and there's, you know, we've done some work with you all, you could potentially use HireRight through us. I do think there are some other really good services out there that, Tricia, we could also include. I think I have that information somewhere. I was talking to a retreat center, a camp recently, and they were talking about for their summer interns. And you just really want to discern what you're looking for, because they had a group that it may have been like $50 or something per intern for a background check, where our background check can be anywhere from like $150 to $300 depending on what we're looking for. So you don't want to spend $300 if you're hiring 50 summer interns. So you just want to make sure you're getting the best you can for what you need, and kind of discern that. Somebody just mentioned, oh, Francis, they use Trek One. Yeah.
Do you have a sample of the signed consent or waiver letter for reference checks? And so I will say that our signed consent, our reference checks actually go through HireRight. It's an add-on service that they provide. They ask objective questions and they send us a report. If in terms of the actual signed waiver, again, that would all be through them, and they would provide that to the person if they requested it. But typically you're only going to need that if it's a prior employer. If it's just a person that they worked with years ago, you can call them and they'll probably answer your questions. That waiver is going to come in when you are reaching out to an actual employer to verify that information. I believe that's all the questions that we have.
And I will say, on GCFA.org, there is an interview/recruiting training. If you go to HR, I'll see if I can find it really quick since we have a minute. It's a free training, and it's similar to this. So if it's something that you want to share with annual conferences, you have to sign up for it. It's through one of our applications, but you just put in your username and your email address, and you'll have access to the training. But like I said, it's a free training. But if I can't pull it up right now, because it might take me too long to find it, I will send it out in our meeting materials that we're going to send out. Yes, you will get that later, because I don't know my own website link for Teachable. It's through a training. So any other questions?
I believe that's all the questions that we have.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. Like I said, you have my email, so feel free to reach out to us if you need anything. And Tricia, you are doing performance reviews next, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So come back to see Tricia talk about performance reviews. All right. Thank you all.